So the last thing that we need to worry about with solving quadratics is called the quadratic formula. So just to recap, we've learned the square root method, we've learned how to factor, and we've learned completing the square. So the thing about factoring is it's kind of hard if you don't have nice numbers. Completing the square turns out to be a disaster if you don't have nice numbers. And then the square root method only works if you don't have that middle term. So the question is, what happens to every other equation? You need some sort of way to solve for x with every other equation, and that's the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, write this down, so the quadratic formula always works. So you can use this to solve any sort of quadratic equation. Remember that the other three methods are very specific, right? You can't use them all the time. You gotta kind of know when to use them, and that comes with practice. But the quadratic formula always works. So that's why I really care about this. And it's kind of amazing. What the quadratic formula says is that any equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c can be solved using x is negative b, or the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So any equation, doesn't matter which quadratic equation you're talking about, can be solved using this. Now, you've probably seen this before, and that's great. Do you know where this comes from? So do you know actually how they solved this for x? The answer to that is they completed the square. To get this formula, all you have to do is complete the square on that equation, and you'll get x equals negative b plus or minus squared b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's why we really care about completing the square, because without it, we wouldn't have the quadratic formula. So completing the square, although you might hate it, that's fine. It's really important, and it's the quadratic formula. So let's use this in practice. A couple examples. Let's say I want to solve 3x squared minus 5x plus 1 equals 0. Solve this for x by using the quadratic formula. I'm going to be very explicit here. What's my a, what's my b, and what's my c? Well, my a was 3, my b was negative 5, my c was 1. So x is negative b, so that gives me a positive 5, plus or minus the square root. B squared would give me 25, minus 4 times 3 times 1. All over 2 times 3 is 6. Now we can clean this up just a little bit. 25 minus 4 times 3 times 1. What is that? Well, 4 times 3 times 1 is 12. So if I subtract that, I'm going to get 13 over 6. So x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 6. Now what does that actually mean? It means you have two different answers. Your first answer is 5 plus the square root of 13 over 2. Sorry, not over 2. Over 6. Your second one is 5 minus the square root of 13 over 6. So that's the answer to the problem. So whenever you have that plus or minus, remember it means there are two different equations. So I want to make sure we understand what that means. Second example, let's look at x squared minus x plus 1 equals 0. I want to solve this using the quadratic formula. So I'm going to need an a, I'm going to need a b, I'm going to need a c. Well, there's nothing in front of that x squared, so a is 1, b is negative 1, c is 1. So x equals, and if you want to pause this and try it on your own and then check in just a minute, that's completely fine, maybe even encouraged. So opposite of b gives me a positive 1, plus or minus the square root. B squared is 1, minus 4 times 1 times 1, so there's my a and c, all over 2 times 1 is 2. So what is this? 1 plus square root of 1 minus 4 is a negative 3 over 2. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that I have a negative 3 under the radical. which is fine if you live in a complex world. Sometimes we do, but not really. So what we say here is that there's no real solution. Now later we're going to figure out that there actually are some solutions that are just complex, but for now we say that there's no real solution. Okay, let's do one more of these. So what about 2x squared plus 4x equals -1? I want to use the quadratic equation to solve for x. Now first off, your equation has to equal 0. Just like when we were factoring, you have to have the equation equal 0. So we got to fix it. There we go. So that was a pretty easy fix. All I did was move the 1 over, and now I can use the quadratic formula. Need an A, need a B, need a C. So A 2, B 4, C 1. So then what's x? So I'll get -4 for my negative b, plus or minus the square root of. B squared is 16 minus 4 times 2 times 1 all over 4. Okay, let's try to clean this up just a little bit. 16 minus 8 is 8. So I get -4 plus or minus the square root of 8 over 4. And again, what does that mean? It's not really clear what it means written that way. It means that either x is -4 plus the square root of 8 over 4, or x is -4 minus the square root of 8 over 4. Those are your two options. Now, it's kind of an aside real quick. I do want to say, what if you're doing this and you get something like 5 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2? Well, what's the square root of 0? Well, that's just 0, and adding and subtracting 0 are the same, so this is just 5 over 2. So if you ever get 0 under the radical, that means you only have one solution. That's the only time you have one solution. And whenever you're doing it, I think you'll see this in practice, but quadratic formula, you're going to want to memorize that for sure. And then keep in mind that it works all the time. So it is really nice to have a way to solve all quadratic equations. So it's something that you want to be very comfortable with.